Why did my husband show up to our anniversary party with divorce papers instead of a gift, right in front of everyone, including my best friend, Marcus? I thought the seating swaps and little jokes were harmless, but he'd been quietly documenting every moment, and now those photos are listed as legal exhibits ready to ruin everything. I'm Sable Quincy, 32 years old, event coordinator for a mid-sized corporate hospitality firm called Pinnacle Events, and I have been married to Ethan for 7 years now, though lately I have started to feel like we are living in two completely different worlds, the kind where he is content with his quiet freelance IT work and weekend routines, while I am constantly surrounded by high-energy people, ambitious professionals, and the kind of social dynamics that require a certain level of sophistication and presence that I am not sure he fully understands anymore. Ethan is a good man. I tell myself this often. And he is an excellent father to our 5-year-old son, Leo. Always patient and attentive in ways that I admire. But when it comes to the demands of my career and the social expectations that come with coordinating corporate events and managing client relationships, he seems uncomfortable and out of place. And I have learned over the past year or so that it is simply easier to bring someone who understands that world. Someone like Marcus, who knows how to read a room and make the right impressions without me having to constantly worry about whether my +1 is going to feel awkward or say the wrong thing at the wrong time. This afternoon, Ethan and I took a walk along the riverside embankment, which used to be our favourite date spot back when we were first married, and I agreed to go because he said he wanted to spend some time together before the week got busy. But honestly, I spent most of the walk checking my phone because Marcus had been texting me about the client pitch we have scheduled for Monday morning, and I needed to make sure we were aligned on the presentation flow and the key talking points we were going to emphasise. Ethan walked beside me in silence for a while, hands in his jacket pockets, and eventually he suggested we make dinner reservations somewhere nice for the weekend. Maybe try that new Italian place downtown that everyone has been talking about, and I told him I was probably going to be too tired for anything fancy because work has been incredibly demanding lately, and I just wanted to keep things low-key and manageable, which was true enough even if I did not mention that Marcus and I had already made plans to grab drinks on Friday evening to debrief after the pitch meeting. When we got back to the house, Ethan settled into his usual spot in the living room, the armchair near the window where he likes to read or work on his laptop, and I took the couch because I needed to FaceTime Marcus about some last-minute changes to our slide deck, and we ended up talking for almost an hour, going over every detail and laughing about some of the more ridiculous client requests we had received that week. At some point, Ethan looked up from his book and asked who I was talking to, and I said it was just work stuff without really looking at him. And he nodded and went back to reading, but I could feel a certain tension in the air, the kind that comes from him wanting to say something but choosing not to. And I told myself that he was probably just tired and that I should not read too much into his mood because he tends to get quiet and withdrawn when he has been working on a complicated project, which is something I have learned to accept about him over the years. Later that evening, after we put Leo to bed, I reminded Ethan that I had the corporate awards dinner coming up on Friday night, the big annual event where the company recognizes top performers and celebrates the year's successes. And I explained that the seating arrangements had been finalized by the executive team and that he would be at table 14 with some of the vendor partners and junior staff members, while I was seated at table 1 with the senior leadership group, because my role required me to be accessible to the executives and key clients throughout the evening. I told him this in a very matter-of-fact way, emphasizing that it was not personal and that the seating assignments were based on departmental structure and professional hierarchy. And he looked at me for a long moment before he asked if Marcus was going to be at my table, and I said yes, because Marcus is senior sales, and it made sense for him to be with the leadership group given his role and his relationships with the major accounts we manage. Ethan did not argue, which is typical for him because he avoids confrontation and tends to internalize his feelings rather than expressing them openly. But I could see something shift in his expression, a kind of resignation or disappointment that I chose to interpret as him being insecure about social settings and professional hierarchies, which is something I have tried to talk to him about before, but he always shuts down the conversation and tells me he is fine. I kissed him on the cheek and told him that it was going to be a fun evening and that he should try to relax and enjoy himself, and that if he wanted to leave early to relieve the babysitter, that would be completely fine with me, and he said he would see how the night went and that he hoped I had a good time. And then he went to take a shower while I stayed up scrolling through the event itinerary and making notes about the speeches and the award presentations that I needed to coordinate. The night of the awards dinner arrived faster than I expected, and I spent most of the afternoon getting ready and making sure my dress and accessories were perfect, because this was one of those events where appearances really mattered and where people noticed who was sitting where and who was being recognized for their contributions to the company's success. When we arrived at the ballroom, Ethan helped me carry in some of the materials I needed for the setup, and then I directed him to table 14, which was toward the back of the room near the service entrance, while I made my way to table 1, which was positioned front and center with a clear view of the stage and the award podium. Marcus was already there, looking sharp in a tailored suit, and he greeted me with a hug and a compliment about my dress, and we spent the next hour mingling with the executives and making small talk with the clients who had been invited as special guests. During dinner, I caught a glimpse of Ethan sitting at his table, looking somewhat out of place among the vendor representatives and the junior coordinators, and I felt a brief pang of guilt that I quickly pushed aside by reminding myself that he was an adult who could handle a few hours of socializing with people he did not know particularly well, and that it was not my job to babysit him through every professional event I organized or attended. Marcus leaned close to me at one point during the meal and whispered something funny about one of the executives who was giving a long-winded toast, and I laughed and touched his arm without thinking. And when I glanced across the room, I saw Ethan watching us, his expression unreadable. But he looked away as soon as our eyes met, and I told myself that he was probably just bored and ready to go home. Toward the end of the evening, Ethan came over to the bar area where I was standing with a few colleagues, and he told me that the babysitter needed to leave soon and that he was going to head out early to get back to Leo, and I said that was fine and that I would catch a ride home later. And Marcus, standing beside me, offered to make sure I got home safely, which I thought was considerate and practical, given that I had been drinking wine throughout the dinner and did not want to drive. The morning after the awards dinner, I woke up with a mild headache and a vague sense of unease that I could not quite pinpoint, and when I checked my phone, I saw that I had posted a story on Instagram the night before, a selfie of Marcus and me raising our champagne glasses with the caption, "Best work husband ever," followed by a briefcase emoji, and while I had been slightly tipsy when I posted it, I did not think much of it at the time because everyone at work understood that Marcus and I had a close professional relationship and that the term work husband was just a light-hearted way of acknowledging our partnership on major projects. Ethan was already up and making breakfast for Leo when I came downstairs, and he greeted me with his usual quiet good morning, and I asked him if he had gotten home okay the night before, and he said yes, that the babysitter had stayed an extra 20 minutes, so he did not have to rush. And then he asked me how the rest of the evening had gone, and I told him it had been great, and that we had celebrated until almost midnight, with drinks and dancing and the kind of high-energy socializing that comes with these big corporate events. Later that weekend, I had to run to the grocery store to pick up some things for the week, and as I was loading bags into my car in the parking lot, I saw Jenna Moss, one of my best friends from college who still lives in the area and works as a freelance graphic designer, and I waved at her, but she seemed to hesitate for a moment before she gave me a quick smile and then walked past with her cart, heading in the opposite direction as if she was in a hurry or did not want to stop and chat. I thought it was odd because Jenna and I usually text each other several times a week, and she has always been the kind of friend who stops to talk whenever we run into each other in public, but I told myself she was probably just having a busy day or dealing with her own stress. And I did not think about it again until later that evening when I got a text from her that simply said she was sorry and that she should have said something sooner. And attached to the message was a screenshot of a group chat that I had completely forgotten about. The screenshot showed a conversation from a few weeks earlier between me, Jenna, and two other friends from our college days. And in the thread, I had made a comment about how Ethan was great with Leo and very dependable as a father, but that he was not exactly what I would call event-ready, because he tended to be uncomfortable in large social settings and did not have the kind of polished professional presence that I needed when I was representing my company at important functions. I had written it in a joking tone, the way friends do when they are venting about minor frustrations in their relationships, and at the time, I had not thought it was particularly harsh or unfair, because I was simply being honest about the differences between Ethan's personality and the demands of my career. But seeing it now in a screenshot, stripped of context and frozen in time, I realized how it might look to someone who did not understand the full picture of our marriage and the challenges we were navigating. I texted Jenna back immediately and told her that I did not appreciate her sending me screenshots of private conversations without any explanation, and that I thought it was a betrayal of trust for her to be questioning my relationship choices when she had no idea what it was like to balance a demanding career with a marriage to someone who did not always understand the social and professional pressures I was under. She did not respond right away, and I put my phone down and tried to focus on getting Leo ready for bed, but the whole interaction left me feeling defensive and irritated, as if Jenna was judging me for something that was none of her business. And I decided that if she was going to be weird and distant about my friendship with Marcus, then maybe we needed to take a break from our regular coffee dates and group hangouts. On Monday, I met Marcus for lunch at the coffee shop near our office, which had become our routine over the past few months because it gave us a chance to debrief about client meetings and strategize about upcoming projects without the distractions of the open-plan office environment where everyone could overhear our conversations. We ordered our usual drinks and sat at a corner table by the window, and I posted a quick photo of my latte with Marcus visible in the background, captioning it, "Brainstorming with my favorite human," followed by a coffee cup emoji, and I tagged the location because I liked documenting the little moments of my day and sharing them with my social media followers who seem to appreciate the behind-the-scenes glimpses into the life of an event coordinator. Marcus and I talked through the agenda for an upcoming client presentation, and he made some excellent suggestions about how to frame the budget breakdown in a way that would appeal to the client's priorities. And I felt grateful to have a colleague who understood my work style and who could match my energy and enthusiasm in a way that Ethan had never really been able to do, even though I knew it was unfair to compare a work partner to a spouse because they served completely different roles in my life. That evening when I got home, Ethan was sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open, working on some kind of spreadsheet that I assumed was related to one of his freelance contracts. And I asked him how his day had gone, and he said it had been fine, that he had finished a security audit for a client and was now organizing some files for tax season. And I told him about the client meeting Marcus and I were preparing for and how excited I was about the potential to land a major account that could really elevate my standing within the company. Ethan listened politely and nodded in the right places, but I could tell he was distracted by whatever he was working on. And when I mentioned that I had grabbed lunch with Marcus, he looked up from his laptop and asked how the meeting with the client had gone, and I realized he was cross-referencing something because he had a strange expression on his face, almost like he was doing mental math or checking a timeline, but when I asked him what was wrong, he said nothing and went back to his work. Later that night, after Ethan had gone to bed, I was scrolling through my work calendar on my phone to make sure I had not missed any important deadlines, and I noticed that Ethan had a calendar entry for the following Thursday that simply said, "Consultation 2 p.m., without any additional details about who he was meeting or what kind of consultation it was, and I assumed it was something related to his IT work, maybe a potential new client or a technical review of some kind, so I did not ask him about it because I figured he would tell me if it was something important. What I did not know at the time was that Ethan had been keeping his own records, quietly documenting the patterns of my behavior and the inconsistencies between what I told him and what I was actually doing, and that the consultation he had scheduled was not with a client, but with someone who was going to help him understand his options and his rights in a situation that he had been observing and analysing for months. 2 weeks later, my mother's 60th birthday arrived, and I had spent considerable time planning a family dinner at one of the nicer restaurants in town, the kind of place with long communal tables and warm lighting and a menu that could accommodate everyone's dietary preferences. And I had invited not just immediate family, but also a few close family friends, including Marcus, because he had been so supportive during a particularly stressful period at work, and my mother had met him several times at company events and always said how charming and professional he was. I spent the afternoon before the dinner finalising the seating arrangements, something I took seriously because I wanted the evening to flow smoothly, and I knew from my professional experience that strategic seating could make or break a gathering. And I decided to place myself and Marcus near the centre of the long table next to my mother, where we could anchor the conversation and keep the energy positive, while I positioned Ethan at the far end with Leo and a couple of younger cousins who were around the same age, along with my Aunt Carol, who was always good with children and would not mind being seated away from the main adult conversation. When I explained the seating arrangement to Ethan that morning, showing him the hand-drawn chart I had sketched out on a piece of notebook paper with everyone's names written in careful block letters, he looked at it for a long moment and then asked why Marcus was sitting at the head of the table while he was positioned at what was essentially the kids' section. And I told him that it was not a kids' section, but rather a family-friendly zone where Leo would be more comfortable and where Ethan could focus on making sure our son was well-behaved during the meal without having to worry about participating in the more intense adult conversations that would be happening at the centre of the table. I explained that Marcus was there in a semi-professional capacity as someone who had become like family through our work relationship, and that my mother appreciated having successful and articulate people around her during milestone celebrations, and I said all of this in a very reasonable tone, as if I was simply being practical and considerate of everyone's comfort levels. But I could see that Ethan was not entirely convinced, even though he did not push back or argue with me the way some husbands might have. The dinner itself was beautiful, at least from my perspective, with candles on the table and a carefully curated selection of wines and appetizers that I had pre-ordered to make sure everything would arrive on schedule. And when we all gathered around the long table, I directed people to their assigned seats, placing name cards at each spot so there would be no confusion or awkwardness about where everyone was supposed to sit. My mother was delighted with the setup and gave a short speech thanking everyone for coming. And then I added a few words about how grateful I was for the people in my life who supported me unconditionally. And I made a point of mentioning Marcus by name, saying that he had been like family to me over the past year and that I could not imagine navigating the challenges of my career without his partnership and friendship. And Marcus raised his glass in acknowledgement, and everyone clapped politely, though I noticed that Ethan did not join in the applause and instead was cutting up food on Leo's plate with his head down and his jaw set in that particular way he has when he is upset but does not want to make a scene. During the main course, Leo tugged on Ethan's sleeve and asked in a voice that was louder than I would have liked why Daddy was not sitting with Mommy and why Mommy was sitting next to Marcus instead. And I saw Ethan lean down and whisper something to him, probably telling him to eat his dinner and not worry about grown-up seating arrangements, but the question hung in the air, and I could feel my Aunt Carol glancing down the table toward me with a look that suggested she found the whole situation a bit odd. I chose to ignore it and kept the conversation flowing at my end of the table, talking with Marcus and my mother about upcoming travel plans and some of the interesting clients I had been working with recently. And I told myself that Ethan would understand eventually that this was not about favoritism or disrespect, but simply about creating the right social dynamic for a milestone celebration where impressions and energy mattered. After dinner, as people were lingering over coffee and dessert, Ethan's sister Nora pulled me aside near the restaurant's back hallway, and she asked me in a very direct and uncharacteristically confrontational tone why I had seated Marcus at the head of the table instead of Ethan, and why it looked to everyone in the family like I was treating my husband as if he was less important than a co-worker. I felt a flash of irritation at her tone, and her presumption that she had any right to question my choices. And I told her that she was being dramatic and old-fashioned, that the seating arrangement was based on who would contribute most to the conversation and create the best atmosphere for my mother's birthday, and that Ethan was perfectly comfortable sitting with Leo and did not need his sister fighting battles on his behalf. Nora looked at me with an expression that was somewhere between disappointment and disgust, and she said that what I was doing was disrespectful and that if I could not see that, then I was either willfully blind or I simply did not care. And then she walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing alone in the hallway feeling defensive and misunderstood. The following Saturday, I attended Leo's soccer game at the community centre, and I brought Marcus along because he had expressed interest in meeting more of my family and seeing what Leo's weekend activities were like, and I thought it would be nice for Leo to see that Mommy had friends who cared about his hobbies and interests. I registered Marcus as a team parent volunteer, getting him one of the lanyards that the league coordinator handed out, and we stood together on the sideline watching the game and cheering when Leo's team scored, and I posted a few photos on my social media with captions about supporting youth sports and enjoying beautiful weather. And in one of the photos, Marcus had his arm around my shoulders in a friendly, casual way that I did not think twice about, until I noticed some of the other parents exchanging glances and whispering to each other near the snack table. Ethan was there as well, standing alone near the far goal post with his hands in his jacket pockets, and I saw Nora arrive midway through the game and immediately walk over to stand next to him, and at one point I caught her holding up her phone as if she was taking photos of the field, though I suspected she was actually documenting the fact that Marcus and I were standing together while Ethan was isolated on the opposite side of the playing area. That evening when we got home, I was in a good mood, energized by the fresh air and the social interaction. And I told Ethan that I was working on the final details for the company's 10th anniversary party, which was going to be a major event held at a beautiful riverside pavilion with catering, a DJ, and an open bar, and that I wanted to make sure he and Leo were both comfortable during the evening, so I was planning to seat them in the family-friendly section where there would be activities for children and a more relaxed atmosphere. I explained to Ethan over breakfast on Tuesday morning that the company anniversary party was going to be a significant milestone event for Pinnacle Events, and that the executive team had worked hard to secure one of the most prestigious venues in the city, a riverside pavilion with floor-to-ceiling windows and a spacious outdoor terrace that overlooked the water, and that the guest list included not just employees and their families, but also major clients, vendors, and community partners who had contributed to the company's success over the past decade. I told him that I had been asked to give a speech during the evening, something that both excited and terrified me, because I would be speaking in front of people whose opinions mattered to my career trajectory, and I wanted everything about the night to be perfect, from the seating arrangements to the timing of the toasts, to the way I presented myself and the people I chose to have around me during the most visible moments of the celebration. When Ethan asked whether we would be sitting together at the party, I felt a familiar sense of frustration rising in my chest, because I had already explained multiple times over the past few weeks that the VIP table was reserved for company leadership and senior staff members, and that Marcus, as the top performer in the sales division, would naturally be seated at that table, along with the vice presidents and the department heads who had driven the company's growth and profitability. I told Ethan that he would be much more comfortable at one of the family tables near the back of the pavilion, where there would be other spouses and children, and where he would not have to worry about making small talk with executives he had never met, or pretending to be interested in corporate strategy discussions that had nothing to do with his own work in IT consulting. I framed this as a kindness, as me being considerate of his preferences and his comfort level, and I said that Leo would have much more fun at a table with other kids where there would be activities and games to keep him occupied during the speeches and award presentations, but Ethan did not seem convinced, and he asked me directly whether Marcus was considered part of the company leadership, and I said yes, that Marcus was senior sales, and that his presence at the VIP table was both expected and appropriate. On Wednesday morning, I had a consultation meeting at a coffee shop downtown with the caterers and the AV team to go over last-minute logistics for the party. And when I returned home that afternoon, I found Ethan sitting at the garage workbench, which was unusual because he typically worked from his home office upstairs, and I noticed that he had several folders spread out in front of him, neatly labelled with words like photos and messages and financial. And when I asked him what he was working on, he said he was just organising some documents for tax purposes and consolidating his freelance income records so that everything would be easier to track when we filed our returns in the spring. I thought nothing of it at the time because Ethan has always been meticulous about financial record keeping, and I was distracted by my own preparations for the party and did not pay close attention to the fact that one of the folders had a label that read custody notes, which I assumed had something to do with shared expenses related to Leo's school and extracurricular activities. That evening, Ethan told me casually, while we were cleaning up after dinner, that he had opened a separate checking account at a different bank to help him organise his freelance income more efficiently, and that he had also updated his emergency contact information with his clients and his father to make sure that if anything happened to him, there would be a clear chain of communication. I told him that sounded like a smart idea and that I appreciated him being proactive about financial organisation, and I did not think to ask why he was suddenly making these changes or why he felt the need to separate his income into a different account, because I was too focused on finalising the guest list for the party and making sure that I had accounted for all the dietary restrictions and accessibility needs that people had submitted on their RSVP forms. On Thursday afternoon, I took Leo to his school's art show, which was being held in the community centre gymnasium with all the children's paintings and drawings displayed on portable easels arranged in rows, and I had told Ethan that I would meet him there because I was coming directly from a client meeting and did not have time to go home first. When I arrived, I saw that Ethan was already there with Nora, standing near the back of the room looking at Leo's painting, which was a colourful abstract piece that he had titled My Family, and which featured what appeared to be 3 stick figures of different sizes. And I walked over to join them, but before I could reach them, I ran into Marcus in the parking lot, because I had mentioned the art show to him during one of our lunch meetings, and he had said he would love to stop by if he was in the area. And I thought it was incredibly sweet that he wanted to support Leo and show interest in my family life outside of work. Marcus and I walked into the gymnasium together, and I immediately went to find Leo's painting and stood beside it with Marcus, while I took several photos and posted one to my social media with a caption about being a proud mom and celebrating creativity, and at some point another parent, someone I did not know very well from the school pickup line, approached us and asked Marcus if he was Leo's stepdad, and I felt my face flush with embarrassment and awkwardness as I quickly explained that no, Marcus was just a close friend from work, and the parent nodded, but gave me a look that suggested she did not entirely believe me or thought the situation was somehow inappropriate. I glanced across the room and saw that Ethan and Nora were watching us from the other side of the gymnasium, and Nora had her phone out and appeared to be taking photos of the art displays, though I suspected she was actually documenting the fact that Marcus and I had arrived together and were standing side by side in front of Leo's painting while Ethan stood alone with his sister on the opposite side of the room. When I got home that evening, I was exhausted from the social dynamics and the emotional labour of managing everyone's perceptions and expectations, and I found Ethan in the garage again, this time with 3 distinct folders arranged on the workbench alongside a thin binder that I had not seen before, and his phone was sitting face up beside the folders with a calendar notification visible on the screen that read, "Follow-up 10 a.m. next Tuesday." And when he saw me looking at his phone, he quickly dismissed the notification and said it was just a reminder for a client deliverable that he needed to finish before the end of the month. I asked him if everything was okay because he seemed unusually quiet and withdrawn, even by his standards, and he looked at me with an expression that I could not quite read and told me that everything was fine, that he was just focused on getting his work organised and making sure he was prepared for the busy season ahead. And then he asked me how the art show had gone and whether Leo had been excited to see his painting on display, and I told him it had been lovely and that Leo was very proud of his work. and I chose not to mention the awkward interaction with the parent who had asked about Marcus or the way Nora had been watching us from across the room. On Friday morning, 2 days before the anniversary party, I woke up early and spent extra time in front of the bathroom mirror rehearsing the speech I was planning to give at the event, the one where I would thank the executive team and acknowledge the people who had been instrumental in making the company's success possible. And I had written a specific section where I praised Marcus by name for his dedication and partnership, and for being the kind of colleague who understood the importance of collaboration and mutual support in achieving ambitious goals. I practiced my delivery several times, adjusting my tone and my pacing to make sure the words would land with the right emotional weight. And I propped my phone against the mirror so I could record myself and watch the playback to see how I looked and sounded. And in the recording, I noticed that when I mentioned Marcus, my face lit up in a way that felt genuine and warm. While when I talked about work-life balance and the challenges of managing professional responsibilities alongside personal commitments, I kept the language deliberately vague and did not mention Ethan by name at all. When I came downstairs, Ethan was in the kitchen making Leo's breakfast, and he was listening to my speech through the open bathroom door, though I had not realized the sound was carrying so clearly through the house. And when I walked into the kitchen, he looked at me with an expression that was difficult to interpret, something between sadness and resignation. And he asked me if I was happy with how the speech had turned out. I told him yes, that I thought it struck the right balance between professional and personal, and that I was confident it would resonate with the audience and set the right tone for the evening. And he nodded slowly and went back to pouring cereal into Leo's bowl without saying anything else, and I felt a brief moment of discomfort wondering if he had noticed that I had not mentioned him in the speech, or if he felt slighted by the amount of attention I was planning to give Marcus, but I pushed the thought aside and told myself that Ethan understood the difference between a professional acknowledgement and a personal relationship, and that he would not be petty enough to make my work achievements about his own insecurities. That afternoon, I went to the grocery store to pick up some snacks and drinks that I wanted to have on hand for the weekend, and as I was loading bags into my car, I saw Jenna walking across the parking lot toward me, and this time she did not avoid me, but instead came directly over and asked if we could talk for a moment. I felt defensive immediately, remembering the screenshot she had sent me weeks earlier and the way she had been distant and judgmental about my friendship with Marcus. But I agreed to hear her out because we had been close friends for years, and I did not want to burn that bridge completely. And she told me in a very quiet and serious voice that she was worried about me and that she thought I was making choices that I might regret later, choices that were hurting Ethan and confusing Leo and damaging my reputation among people who cared about me. I told her that she did not understand the complexities of my situation, that my marriage to Ethan had become something different over the years, and that Marcus was simply a colleague and friend who happened to understand my professional world in a way that Ethan never could, and that I was not doing anything wrong by prioritizing my career and surrounding myself with people who supported my ambitions. But Jenna shook her head and said that it was not about ambition or career success. It was about respect and boundaries and the way I was publicly treating my husband as if he was less important than a co-worker. And she said that if I could not see how that looked to everyone who knew us, then I was either deliberately ignoring the truth or I had convinced myself that my behavior was justified when it clearly was not. I left the grocery store feeling angry and misunderstood, and I sent Jenna a text later that evening telling her that I appreciated her concern, but that I did not need her judgment or her unsolicited advice about my marriage, and that if she could not support me and trust that I knew what I was doing, then maybe we needed to take some space from each other for a while. She did not respond, and I told myself that I was better off without friends who were going to question my choices and make me feel guilty for pursuing the kind of life and career that I had worked so hard to build. And I focused instead on the excitement of the upcoming party and the opportunity to celebrate my achievements in front of people who actually understood and valued what I had accomplished. On Friday evening, I left the house early to oversee the setup at the Riverside Pavilion, and I spent hours working with the caterers and the decorators to make sure every detail was perfect, from the centerpieces on each table to the lighting scheme that would make the venue look elegant and sophisticated in the photographs that would inevitably be posted all over social media. Ethan stayed home with Leo, and I texted him once during the afternoon to remind him that the party started at 6 o'clock the next evening and that he should plan to arrive with Leo around 5:30 so they could get settled at their table in the family section before the VIP reception began at the front of the pavilion. And I added that he should try to keep Leo calm and quiet during my speech because I did not want any distractions or interruptions during what was going to be one of the most important professional moments of my career. Ethan replied with a simple understood and nothing else, and I felt a small twinge of annoyance at his curtness, but I told myself that he was probably just tired and that he would be fine once he saw how beautiful the venue looked and how much effort I had put into making the evening special. When I finally got home late Friday night, I was exhausted but exhilarated, and I found Ethan sitting on the front porch steps in the dark, and I asked him why he was outside instead of in bed, and he told me that he had just needed some fresh air and some time to think. I sat down beside him and told him enthusiastically about all the preparations and how incredible the venue looked and how confident I felt about the speech I was going to give, and he listened without interrupting. And then he said something that caught me off guard. He said that he hoped the party went exactly as I had planned it, and that he was going to handle things the right way. And I asked him what he meant by that, and he just shook his head and said, I would understand soon enough. I laughed nervously and told him he was being dramatic and cryptic, and that there was nothing to handle because everything was already organized and under control. And he looked at me with an expression that I could not quite read in the darkness, and said that he knew everything was under control, that he had made sure of it. And then he stood up and went inside without saying goodnight, leaving me sitting alone on the porch steps, feeling confused and slightly unsettled by his tone and his strange choice of words. Saturday evening arrived with perfect weather, and I spent the afternoon getting ready with extra care, choosing a cocktail dress that I knew would photograph well and styling my hair in loose waves that looked effortless but had actually taken me nearly an hour to perfect. And by the time I arrived at the Riverside Pavilion at 5 o'clock, the venue was already buzzing with early arrivals and last-minute setup adjustments. I stood at the VIP entrance greeting executives and senior staff members as they arrived, and Marcus appeared beside me looking sharp in a navy suit, and he handed me a glass of champagne and complimented me on how stunning I looked. And I felt a surge of confidence and excitement knowing that this was going to be the night where all my hard work and careful planning would finally be recognized and celebrated in front of everyone who mattered. Ethan arrived with Leo at 5:30 as I had instructed, and they made their way to table 12 in the family section near the back of the pavilion, and I saw other parents and their children already settled at nearby tables, and I waved at Ethan from across the room but did not go over to greet them because I was busy managing the VIP reception and making sure that the executives had everything they needed before the program officially began. At 6:10, I stepped up to the microphone to deliver my welcome speech, and I thanked the leadership team and talked about the company's journey over the past decade. And then I turned slightly and gestured toward Marcus, saying that I wanted to give special recognition to my incredible work partner Marcus Halford, who had made every challenging day better and who had shown me what true professional partnership looked like. And as I spoke those words, I saw Marcus raise his glass toward me with a proud smile, and the room erupted in polite applause.